Okay, good morning to everybody. You are joining the Impact for Breakfast session on a blueprint for ethical gold mining. We are joined by people with some remarkable experiences. Before I hand it over to them, I would like to talk a little bit about the IFB network and our history, and then just really hand it off. This is a conversation. We encourage a lot of audience participation. I know the three individuals on panelists on this call don't mind being interrupted, so please feel free to do so. So my name is Kayvon. I am the head of Impact for Breakfast. The network started 18 years ago with just a handful of people around a table in London and has since grown to over 6,000 members. Our membership is weighted intentionally towards individuals who reside somewhere in the capital stack. Somewhere they're holding different kinds of money, different patience, different risk tolerances. And what we're trying to do is present to them needs and opportunities that we have vetted somewhat and understand the character of the people that we're working with and feel very comfortable presenting them in a forum like this to take the need and opportunity and hopefully with the allocation of certain resources generate some momentum for those opportunities. That's why we're here. We're also a decentralized network, meaning we have 50 chapters around the planet. 49 of them are local, one of them is global. Global being sessions that are organized such as this one. So that's the IFB. We encourage you to put any questions that you have in the chat, raise your hand, or maybe even just interrupt. Aside from that, I just want to tell you that the complexities of the country we're describing today, DRC, there's language, to speak French, and we wanted to for sure have local participation on this panel, but that's on me. It's a 75-minute session. We want to make it conversational. Real-time translation just wasn't an option in this session. So in the future, we would love to accommodate that.
Mm.
So with that, I'd love to hand it over to Greg and enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kivan, and thank you to the Impact for Breakfast network. So my name is Greg Valerio. I suppose I could just be described as the founder of Peace Gold, although that's a slightly nuanced statement. So it's a big thank you to you all for being on this call, for taking up the time to listen, to participate. As Kivan has said in his introduction, what we're talking about here is complicated. In essence, it's simple. In execution, it's complex. I intend to talk a little bit about the history of what Peace Gold is and how we've got to the place that we are now. I'll cover off the key touchstones. We have Estelle, we have Benedict on the call as well, and they'll be kind of co-presenting alongside myself. And I'm trusting that between the three of us, we will be able to give a fairly holistic picture and trajectory of Peace Gold and why we believe as exponents of, as practitioners within the responsible mining sector, a phrase I don't like, but for the ease of conversation, we'll use it. But in the responsible sourcing sector, we've all come to the place where we recognize that Peace Gold really is the holy grail of the responsible sourcing trajectory that so many of us have been on for 10, 20, 30 odd years. And I'm aware, because I can read names on this call as well, that we have people like Christian, and Matthew and others who, have to a greater or lesser extent also walked this path. So they will have their own perspectives, I'm sure, to bring as we progress. But let's go right the way back. My background is as a jeweler. So back in the day, we're talking about the late 90s, we founded a small company called Cred Jewelry, which we wanted to be a fair trade jewelry business. And by fair trade, we meant all the way to source, not just manufacturing and, but all the way back to the hole in the ground where the materials come from. And that was a very difficult trajectory, a very difficult thing, because essentially at the time, we faced a conspiracy of silence, an intentional conspiracy of silence from within the jewelry trade and the mining sector around transparency and traceability. And without going into a lot of the details, we eventually managed to secure, with my then colleague Christian Cheeseman, we managed to secure our first fully traceable gold source from Colombia, Oro Verde, down in the Choco region, working with the Afro-Colombian community. They were doing a mercury-free sort of environmental mining process, alluvial, and we started buying gold from them and turning it into wedding rings and selling them. And that really catalyzed what everybody to that point said was impossible, which was a fully traceable supply chain from mine all the way through to the customer, i.e. the high street, the mom and pop shop, the person that buys the jewelry. That in and of itself catalyzed a whole chain reaction around fair trade gold, fair trade standards, the Alliance for Responsible Mining, Fair Mine Standards. I was one of the three founding directors of the Alliance for Responsible Mining, because we recognized that here was a commercial response to a systemic and invisible injustice, i.e. artisanal small-scale miners. We know it's the second biggest employment bracket on the planet, and it's invisible. People just were not talking about it. Having done that, it catalyzed a whole process which led us to doing certified fair trade, fair mine gold, bringing that to market in 2011. And then in 2013, I was approached by Peace Direct, which is a UK peace building organization that was working with a Congolese-based Center for Resolution Conflict, which is a peace building and conflict resolution civil society organization. And they had this idea that in their demobilization of militia groups, the DDR process, demobilization, demilitarization, and reintegration strategies, and that was across men, women, and children. The biggest challenge which they faced on the ground post the DDR process was, what do we do with the adult men? Because, they need jobs, they need work, they need engagement. Otherwise, they're going to sit around and do very little. And the temptation to go back to an old lifestyle was quite considerable. So they came up with this idea that maybe we could use the value of the gold in the ground in the region that we were working, rather than that value helping to perpetuate conflict, and illicit activity and criminal behavior and funding all the wrong things. And we don't need to rehearse the details of that, because I'm sure that if we're on this call, we're familiar with the negative narrative, and it's a very real negative narrative. We're not minimizing that at all. But can we use that same value to generate peace and conflict resolution? I.e., in simplest of terms, can we move from conflict gold to peace gold? And that really is the axis around which peace gold spins. That's our challenge. And Peace Direct, who Benedict, one of our co-presenters, will talk a little bit about later. She used to work for them. We secured some money from an American foundation, GHR, and then also from the EPRM budget out of the European Union, to basically run a 5-year pilot project looking at how can we create a systemic response to the challenge. So it was slightly more than just a responsible sourcing initiative. What we wanted to do from the very, very outset was integrate peace building and conflict resolution into the very fabric of what we were delivering. So essentially, we worked on three pillars: formalization and legalization. Let's get everybody legal. Mercury free, so health and safety and mercury free production, and then export commercial. And then can we create a circular economy which brings that value back to the ground and gets reinvested, and you just keep that circle spinning. Over the 5 years, we managed to deliver with 2 pilot cooperatives a fairly substantial program. And I think importantly, it was a very community-based approach. Without CRC, who obviously for the reasons that Keyvan has explained couldn't join us on the call today, they really led the initiative. And what was so critical about that as a grassroots community-based initiative was they managed to do what so often is the elusive, unquantifiable piece of work, which without no initiative works successfully, and that is create a high trust environment. You know, they worked with integrating different groups together to work in cooperatives. We worked on the formalization. We worked with lots of different actors in the supply chain. And obviously our backgrounds in the jewelry sector, we have very good networks, both nationally here in the UK, but also internationally: refiners, fabricators, manufacturers, jewelers, jewelry brands, all of whom were buying into the idea of Peace Gold. So we came to the realization very early on that we were not going to have too much of a challenge selling the product. The challenge was the ground game. How do we do this on the ground, recognizing the basic challenges? So that's essentially what Peace Gold became. It became a methodological approach to integrating responsible sourcing, the value chain from mine all the way through to the customer. And then critically, as anybody that's worked in the DRC will know, the one problem they don't have is around volumes of gold. We ended up moving from 2 cooperatives to 7. We had cooperatives queuing up to get on the program because they were looking for one thing. And this was for me, the most interesting thing that emerged when we were getting into what does the commercial structure look like. Most people think it's all about price. And obviously price is important when you're in the gold business. People want to know how much they're buying this particular piece of gold doré for. But beyond that, all the cooperatives that were coming to us, knocking on the door saying, look, we want on the program, we want to be participating, we want to see the benefits, we don't want children in our mines, we don't want, mercury in our system, we want to be responsible, we want to be legal, we want to do the right thing, we just have never had the opportunity before. The one thing which they were looking for more than anything was stability. They're tired. And it's very, for them, that was the weariness of the conflicts, the destabilization, the internally displaced people, and all the social pressures that come with that. There was a weariness in some of those communities. And here came an opportunity to be a part of something that was going to help them to build a platform beyond just the illicit economics which were taking place on the ground. And so we worked very hard over those 5 years. We really looked to address the social challenges, the pinch points around conflict, how we were doing the peace building and the conflict resolution. And I'm not going to go into the details of that because that will come a bit later on with Benedict. But essentially, we began to analyze the social drivers that were creating conflict and illegality, and then began to build models and strategies that essentially would help us to deal with those directly and head on, unapologetically. And critically, we made sure that all the key stakeholders, trendy name in the development world, I know, but all those key stakeholders like the government, the provincial government, all the different departments, in all the local community leaders, chiefs of villages, etc., they were involved in building the framework. So Peace Gold is now, after 5 years of working through the non-profit lens, we took a very strategic decision back in end of 2023-24 to flip it into a social enterprise. And that's where we are at the moment. We recognize that you cannot build a systemic solution to these kind of challenges through the non-profit sector. For the very simple reason, after 3 years, the funding runs out. After 3 years, USAID closes down, or whatever, or DFID closes down, or whatever the driver might be. It's only ever temporary funding benchmarked over a series of years. And then you hit the cliff edge, everybody falls off, you can't get the grants renewed, and everybody goes all the way back to the beginning. But here were we, 11 cooperatives now signed onto the system with a production of over 50 kilos of gold a month, thinking, we're not poor. We're not poor. Nobody in this network is poor. The challenge is there's no infrastructure that can deliver the systemic delivery platform and a system that can drive that value, the circular economy that can drive that value back to the ground to build out the really important stuff, community development, upholding human rights, gender equity, etc., etc. So we created a financial model that can achieve that as well. And critically, going back to the opening statements, all of this has emerged from the ground. It's a genuine grassroots movement. So we talk with the guys in the Congo every other week. We're constantly in touch, all the different dynamics. So Peace Gold is, as I said at the beginning, in essence, it's a very simple proposition. But obviously in its execution and its delivery, there are complexities, which we don't trivialize. But we have very strong commercials. I mean, for every 10 kilos of gold that we are able to sell to the off-taker, the refiner, and we're in those discussions at the moment with some of them, for every 10 kilos we're moving, we are able to generate a net profit of in excess of, at today's current gold prices, as I ran the numbers this morning, $250,000. Now that money travels a long way in context. So we have a corporate structure, we have a foundation structure, which we're putting together at the moment, and we have a very clear economic framework, and we have a very clear social enterprise, social impact framework, which is going to deliver the value, the social value into the ground. I think I'll stop at that point. I'm sure there's lots of questions that may be pinging out, but maybe hand over to, I don't know, Benedict to just talk a little bit more of the detail around the social impact framework.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. And hi, everyone. It's good to be here with you. So Greg very briefly mentioned that I previously worked with Peace Direct, which is a UK-based international NGO working with local partners and local peace builders in conflict areas around the world. I worked with PD between 2021 and late 2025 and was responsible for managing the relationship and partnership with CRC, with the Centre Résolution Conflit. So sort of managing and liaising between Greg and CRC and the cooperatives in the context of Peace Gold when it was a peace building sort of NGO program. A lot of work was done over that time, and so I just want to share maybe a few of the examples of things that were achieved during the NGO phase, and some of the things that Peace Gold now as a commercial enterprise and as the foundation alongside it are hoping to continue building on over that time. So Greg touched on the fact that part of it was legalization and formalization of artisanal cooperatives. The vast majority of cooperatives in Eastern DRC are informal, and that is a massive barrier, as most people probably know here, to the ability to legally export gold and legally generate revenue. But alongside that, it's important to note that CRC, as a 30-year-old peace building organization and trusted partner in this process, also has a vast amount of experience in conflict mediation, conflict transformation, in community cohesion and social development, all of which are aspects that also hinder the ability of cooperatives to stabilize and the ability of communities to thrive and develop. And so there is the legalization and formalization process that are the imperatives to, the building blocks to the business. But alongside that, and to support the communities themselves, there is that wider piece around cohesion. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the narratives and the conflict dynamics in Eastern Congo, or at least the reputation that Eastern Congo has as, facing the resource curse and facing these endless cycles of conflict. CRC as a peace building organization and as a key partner within the Peace Gold framework has over 30 years of experience working with communities across ethnic lines, across territories, and the local, provincial, regional authorities in the name of social cohesion, in the name of peace building, in the name of demobilization and reintegration of children of former combatants, and a lot of their work as well. We've spoken about how this is driven by CRC, and CRC's work itself is driven by the communities that they work with. So it isn't only CRC as an organization kind of saying, we think that this is important. It's their work with cooperatives, their work with communities that really created the impetus for this. CRC was recognized by UNESCO in 2020. They received a prize for the promotion of tolerance and nonviolence from UNESCO in 2020. And that was again off the back of their 30 years of work, which has continued to this day. And within the context of Peace Gold itself, some of the examples and some of the things that they really focused on included, the reintegration of children into schools. So we know that in artisanal mining, child labor is rampant. It's very difficult to weed out due to the levels of poverty, due to the levels of conflict that exist on the ground. During the program, over 950 children were reintegrated into schools. And the program itself, the work that Peace Gold was doing, was helping families increase their own revenue and parents increase their own income. And that was helping parents then not send their children to mines, but pay for tuition fees for children to be able to go to school. Part of it was and continues to be an element of psychosocial support and trauma support. So a lot of miners, a lot of people within these communities have experienced conflict themselves. Many have been combatants in some way or other, and a big part of the work that CRC are doing, a big part of what Peace Gold as a company and the foundation hope to do and will continue building on is trauma response, psychosocial response, helping communities rebuild some of that social fabric that has eroded over time so that communities can continue working together. There's an element of there's an element of Peace Gold that relates to gender equality and sort of the ways in which women can get involved. And, this is something that is continuing to be discussed and continuing to be worked out and built out. But part of it is that a lot of women can't do some of the heavier work, and there are other positions that they can undertake within the wider ecosystem of mining, whether it is supporting reforestation and agricultural elements, whether it is working as community liaisons within communities between the miners, the local authorities, to support social cohesion, to continue sort of the conversation going at that level. And many women within Peace Gold worked within a social fund committee that was set up And they were really responsible for liaising and understanding the needs of the community, discussing those with the cooperatives, with local authorities, and identifying some of the solutions for social fund and longer term community development. On the environmental level, Greg mentioned the elimination of mercury, and one of the cooperative members has spoken previously about the ways in which he is now able to deliver training to other cooperatives and to others to help reduce the use of mercury. He has spoken about how prior to the elimination of mercury, people were falling ill within the communities and they couldn't understand what was causing it. And mercury has really long-term negative health effects, and the elimination of mercury has helped on that level and is something that the cooperatives have committed to within the context of Peace Gold, recognizing the environmental impacts as well. And then the final piece I want to touch on before, bringing it back to Greg or to Estelle is around reforestation and land rehabilitation, because obviously we talk a lot about the negative impact of mining, and we know that mining as currently undertaken is highly degrading of the natural environment. Within the DRC mining code, within international frameworks, there are regulations and laws that exist, sorry, to include environmental surveys and plans. And the Peace Gold company will be working with environmental partners to help design the plans with miners from the outset, so that even when if miners are moving to new areas or as miners are working within specific concessions, they have a clear remediation plan in place. They have a clear plan on will the land be regenerated as forestry or as agriculture, and working with community members then to set up the foundations for that longer term regeneration of the land. Which then also contributes to the diversification of income, to the diversification of jobs within the mining environment, and sort of recognizing that as it stands, mining is the key area of employment, but there are so many different facets of work that community members can get involved in. I'm going to stop there for now, I think, and then I don't know if Estelle, you have anything you'd like to add. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Honestly, listening to you guys, it always excites me, makes me so proud to be part of. So I want to talk about risk. But first, let me just explain a little bit about who I am and why Levin Sources is part of the team. I began in the early days of my career. Sorry, that's my phone ringing. In the early days of my career, I began working in guerrilla conservation in Eastern DRC. I was the international coordinator for something called the Durban Process that was trying to address illegal mining in the Kahuza-Biega National Park. That was just on the back of having worked in the World Bank's Community and Small Scale Mining Secretariat, which is where I met Greg, where we were figuring out how do we get the world motivated and interested in driving responsible trade from ASM, leveraging the experience I had in peace diamonds in Sierra Leone and that Greg had working in Colombia with Oro Verde. So our history goes way back. And in 2010, I founded a company called Levin Sources. We're a social enterprise. And we're one of the world's leading advisors to build sustainable and equitable minerals value chains. And we've done over 325 projects for over 160 clients in over 90 countries. And at least a third of those have been on gold. And also another third, with a bit of overlap on that gold, has been on ASM. But I should emphasize that every year we've been doing multiple projects in the DRC. It's a country about which we are very passionate and very knowledgeable. And so I wanted to mention that because I want to demonstrate to you the types of partners that Greg and Benedict are trying to pull in to really ensure that not only are we going to control risk really well, but we are accessing world-class expertise and experience in really bringing this dream to life. I think, so that's one aspect of de-risking, and talk a little bit about the fact that the team has really strong experience in driving responsible production in ASM in DRC, but also internationally, and supporting responsible sourcing from artisanal small-scale miners, especially in conflict-affected and high-risk areas, and especially in relation to conflict minerals, and especially in relation to DRC, though not only in DRC. Our team has diplomatic experience. We have ex-diplomats in the Eleven Sources team who are one of them is going to be leading on this project as our director. And our responsibility as Eleven Sources is really in the compliance and risk management, whilst being an ally on driving positive impact as well. And because of Rachel's diplomatic experience, including working as a diplomat in the DRC for the British government, dealing with conflicts and security, and also working on minerals there there too. We have someone that really knows how to deal with politics. And I think any commercial operator will tell you that in the DRC, business is made or broken by having a profound and respectful approach to how politics plays out at the local, national, and international level in relation to minerals in DRC. We have other team members as well that have done their PhDs on conflict minerals in DRC that work in our responsible sourcing team, and they will be mobilized to work on this project as well. We also have really meaningful international relationships with the major players in the gold business at Eleven Sources. And we've been involved in designing and delivering some of the most important international frameworks and national frameworks for ensuring responsible trade, including from the DRC. So I myself was involved in helping design the audit protocol for the Intergovernmental Conference of the Great Lakes regional certification mechanism that then got domesticated into national law in DRC 10 years ago. Also supported the Congolese government through World Bank funding to scope whether or not they should do a competitive or non-competitive approach to traceability as a core component of ensuring responsible sourcing is possible, and many more examples. So we've been in the guts of helping put in place the compliance frameworks for the Europeans, for the Americans, for the Congolese, for the region, for the OECD, that business has to comply with in order to trade legally from this country. So we know them well, and we know how to implement them. And we also know very well how to address the adverse impacts of ASM. And the example that Benedict gave about environmental sensitivity, we will be using the Forest Smart Mining bolt-on standard that Eleven Sources designed for the World Bank to ensure that artisan small-scale mining can be conducted in ways that manages risks to forests and forest values. And I see Bernardo Ranieri on the call, who was involved in a related Forest Smart Mining project for us in Brazil. So just want to reassure you on that. So the expertise, I think, and the team quality is a core part of why we're confident where others fear to tread, we are exceptionally well placed to test and try and do and have done together. We have worked together in the Congo. We had a $12 million US aid project called Zahabu Safi, and CRC was a local partner, and Greg was also involved as an advisor. And Eleven Sources, we were responsible for building downstream appetite, so reducing the risk, increasing risk appetite, and confidence for refiners, both LBMA and non-LBMA, and also jewelers to wish to engage with sourcing from DRC. And we also dealt with insurance, vaulting, logistics, all these other trade-related barriers, finance, that are the real reason why responsible sourcing from ASM so frequently falls over itself. And on the back of that project, have a whole range of management systems, relationships that we'll be mobilizing, not just to ensure the compliance of the trades, but to really ensure the efficiency and the commercial, profitability of this, and to de-risk it ultimately. A few other ways that we're de-risking the project is, we've spoken about the importance of our local team. I mean, that's really I would say the most important thing is our strong local partners, the regularity of engagement and the trustful relationships with the local cooperatives and others that we will be relying upon and working with. But another key part of Peace Gold that I think does set it apart from many initiatives is that we're really putting shared value and meaningful, equitable beneficiation with the miners at the heart of our business model. And this will not just secure trust in a contractual sense, but there's a business case, there's a really strong business and development and social case for them to work with us. And we can see that from the appetite that they're showing to get started. And we're terribly frustrated that because of commercial barriers, we're not able to start that yet. And then we're going to be obviously building, in addition to CRC's on the ground presence as the local support organisation, we'll be building that local commercial presence to really manage the deal flow. Once we get past our first trade, and I think if you have questions on that, Greg can talk a bit more about that because that's in the plan for the next 6 months. Once we get our first round raised, and then also ensuring proper governance through a professional board as well. So there's a range of aspects through which we're controlling risk. If you have more questions on risk, I'd be really happy to answer them. And I'll stop there and maybe we can pass to a discussion now. Really keen to hear your questions.
Brilliant. Before we do, awesome panel. Thank you. All perspectives were presented. Greg, you mentioned stability on the ground.
Yeah.
That being the fundamental of what people needed. I can understand that given the context. What does stability for the organization look like for you? What do you need to operate from stability?
Do you mean as a fledgling company?
Perfect.
Okay, yeah. Well, we, as Estelle alluded to, just in her conclusion, we're moving to, we're doing a first round fund basis. It's almost like a friends and family round, for want of a better expression, to raise £100,000. That £100,000 will create the legal infrastructure, Peace Gold Congo. We have a limited company here in the UK called Peace Gold Trading Limited. We're currently setting up the foundation, and that's with the lawyers at the moment who are putting all the articles of association and the memorandums, etc., together. That will be a registered charitable organisation. So we have a UK company that will handle the commercials, and that will be, and the governance and the primary compliance work that needs to take place. We'll have a foundation which will build on the social impact framework. I've noticed that Justin Sykes from Innovest Advisory is on this call. They did a brilliant job at taking the 5 years worth of learning that we did and turning that into a social impact framework, a methodology, and theory of change for us. And that is going into, that's going to be, the foundation will be the custodians of that delivery. And we're working now as we speak on the mission lock between those two UK organizations. The critical delivery framework is going to be in the Congo. The axis revolves around the Peace Gold Congo comptoir, licensed comptoir. They will hold the licenses for buying and exporting. And gold, interestingly, is not the only product that's coming out of the ground. It's not very often I get the opportunity to hold a 156 carat emerald in my hand. But that's not a one-off, put it that way. So we will be picking up 2 licenses in country, which will be a gold license and a gemstone license. We have, and then alongside that, and I think this is again really building interestingly on our experience of working within the fair trade system all those years. We have every cooperative that is onboarded with Peace Gold agrees to the delivery of 1% of their revenue, which doesn't sound very much, but when you're dealing with gold, it's not a small number. That goes into a social fund, and that social fund is managed by a social fund committee. That committee is basically a tripartite committee between the cooperative itself, the community who will be the primary beneficiaries, and the civil society organisation, which introduces a third-party agent to ensure full legality and alignments, etc., etc. And they will hold their own bank account into which that 1% goes. So the delivery mechanism will be primarily those social fund committees, which are focused on the development of their own communities. And I think what we And that has worked extremely successfully within the fair trade system. And there's no point in reinventing the wheel. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that system has worked spectacularly across all the fair trade commodities. And we've effectively implemented exactly the same organizational structure on the ground. The stability comes from the level of participation that is coming from the communities themselves. If you imagine if you've got a conflict in an area, and this is very live in some of the situations that we're involved with at the moment, a mine has to stop working because it ends up in a red flagged area. It ends up in a red zone. So step one for stability is every cooperative agrees to down tools, mothball, walk away. They do not get involved with anything that could potentially be emerging in a potential red zone. Let's assume that the negotiations with the agents of the conflict in a particular area, they come to a settlement, they come to an understanding, they come to a resolution, they agree to demobilize, then that's fantastic. That's not a process that we would get involved with as Peace Gold. That is a political process. The local provisional authorities have to deal with that. But part of the rationale of Peace Gold is, well, what happens after that? Let's say there's a cessation of violence, which is a good thing. What has historically happened is that cessation of violence, there's nothing that comes in and backfills. Who works with those communities? Who works with those resources? How do those resources get allocated back to communities? How do those communities rebuild themselves, rehouse, whatever it might be? And that's really where Peace Gold begins to step into that second stage breach. We are to a degree, through the formalization process that we've discussed, through our methodology, through our critical partnerships with CRC and others, we come in as part of the economic restabilization of an area, and the cooperatives can onboard with us. And that gives them a stable export platform. So they're no longer in the quasi-illicit, illegal economy, which pretty much everybody in that, Turi province, 95% of the gold that is produced from that province is smuggled. And we're talking maybe 6,000 kilos of gold per annum. That's not an exaggerated figure. So you can see what's happening on the ground in a purely commercial terms. So what Peace Gold does, and what we are proposing, is that we build an infrastructure and the networks, the trained and skilled personnel. We empower the cooperatives to act in an ever improving, responsible way. We bring experts in, like Estelle and her team, to do the training, etc., etc. We invest into communities. We invest into the cooperative. So we're constantly building human capacity, building stability. And of course, the benefits are then seen by communities. That's critical. Many promises are made, very few are delivered. And our challenge, very practically, is we have to deliver on the promise. But the agents of that promise are the communities themselves. This is not a top-down model. And I think where historically a lot of well-intentioned, and I'm not questioning intention, a lot of those well-intentioned initiatives, the white elephants that emerge in the mining sector, both large and small, are because the people that are executing the programs are primarily executing them from a top-down model. And it just simply doesn't work. I've done community development work for 30 plus years, cut my teeth in the slums of Addis Ababa. If you've got a bottom-up grassroots approach, which builds human capacity on the ground, you're building in stability at that level. Everybody is invested into making sure they don't lose it. So I think that's some of the work that we do, but obviously all of that requires funds. And this I think is the genius of how we've constructed Peace Gold. We have enough of the value chain in terms of gold and other minerals to be able to fund out this process from what we are doing commercially. And critically, and this is something I didn't mention in my introduction, when we were doing this under the auspices of the EPRM, when it was a Peace Direct funded initiative, we built in a replication model. So everything that we do is replicable, not just in the region that we're working, but we can take it, and we're already talking about another province in the country. We've actually had a number of people approach us from South America saying, we really like the model. How can we discuss it more? So the replicability of what we're doing is very exciting, because essentially the model is commercial and social impact, hand and glove, one foot in front of the other. Each step, you can't go forward unless you've got two legs walking in the same direction, and those are the two legs, the two pillars of what we're doing. So it is legal compliance, but it is critically, it's the social impact, it's the methodology on the ground, it's the grassroots which makes this work, and that critically builds trust.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Gary, I believe you have a question. Would you like me to read it, or would you like to present it?
You can read it. That's fine.
All right. In conflict situations, once violence has ceased, is the implication that a formal political entity has emerged that has clear expectations and commitments?
Ivan, I don't really understand the question, so it might help for Gary to expand a little bit, please.
I'm trying to understand what the implications of conflict are actually where the co-ops are, where you're working. So if you're in conflict zones and you're working around this, it sounds like you have, which sounds great, local connections, and that there's always a political component. But are those political entities changing? And how do you maintain stability? And in your experience, is it, the things, so there's certainly going to be financial implications of people coming and going. You're sitting on top of a massive amount of potential resources for all manner of agendas. So I'm just trying to understand what that looks like on the ground, and how what that looks like. If you've been able to stand up, however many of these you have, with the kind of supply you're talking about, that's a pretty big deal. So, like, how do you make all that work with all of those different people, in the local community?
Shall I take this one, Greg, because it touches on the work that CRC does in particular in local peacebuilding organizations? Cool. Thanks, Gary, for clarifying a bit what you mean with that question. I think firstly, the conflicts and the type of conflict that we're looking at in Ituri, and that the cooperatives are dealing with, that partners are dealing with in Ituri, are very different from the types of conflict that we're seeing in the news around, for example, the M23 occupation of North Kivu and South Kivu. And I think it's important to kind of distinguish between these, because the types of conflicts that CRC work with and that the cooperatives are dealing with aren't related to the same degree to regional proxies and to geopolitical interference. That is a part of the conflicts that they face, but not to the same degree as other areas. And most of the conflicts that they're working with and confronted with are very localized. They are conflicts that, might date back generations, might be exacerbated by grievances that were set up during the colonial era and the way in which the Belgian administration, for example, managed different ethnic groups and different types of communities and their relationship. But it means that these are very much at the community level. And so CRC as a peace building organization, and this is why CRC in particular, and why we're talking about the imperative of peace building in these contexts, is because they have decades of experience now in bringing together communities when a conflict is emerging or if a conflict has been lasting for a while, and having series of dialogues and series of conversations between community members and within communities to try and understand the grievances and to try and find a common solution to those. So it isn't necessarily that a formal political entity will kind of emerge and decide. It is that where those conflicts are so micro level and might be over things like access to land or the borders of the borders of chiefdoms and the resources that are based on that, or access to markets or to roads, they will have a process through which on the one hand they will start with dialogues within communities themselves, and then as they are building trust, they will then bring those communities together, those conflicting communities together, to help them put together a roadmap and to help them put together really localized solutions to the conflicts at hand. Now, one of the hurdles within the NGO system is that then where resources are needed to be able to fund these solutions, for example, building a market or, strengthening a road or something like that, the funding is often limited, which was something that I encountered often working with CRC within Peace Direct, and is something that Peace Gold is quite unique in that with the Social Development Fund, within those cooperatives, within those communities, they would then have the agency to be able to build whatever infrastructure they need, or, put into practice that roadmap that the communities come to together with the mediation of CRC or other peace building organizations with local authorities to be able to commit to those solutions that they kind of identify. I don't know if that answers your question or.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful context. I mean, I guess I was the context versus the proxy areas. I get that, right? So this is a different context and a different set of rules.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and notably, we're very aware that M23 is under sanctions, that there are implications of working within occupied territories. CRC are based in a separate province, so the dynamics are just slightly different in that way, but it does remain a very important question, like, okay, how do we resolve these conflicts and how do partners on the ground resolve them when they come up?
Is the formal government influence in the area relatively light, or is it are they part of this part of the solution? I'm
Yeah,
assuming. Yep.
they're always, yes. So part of what makes CRC an important partner, but other peace building organizations as well, touching on what Estelle was talking about the politics and the access to politicians at their level, local peace building organizations are very careful at fostering the right relationships with government authorities at the local, at the provincial level, to make sure that there is buy-in from everyone with authority. And similarly, they will foster communications, collaboration with customary authorities as well, where there might be conflicts that arise on the interaction between government authorities and customary authorities. So they're very well plugged in across communities, across different authorities, to make sure that the relevant authorities are always clued in and that they have that buy-in throughout the process.
And if I understand, Peace Gold is sort of okay, this might not be the right term. I was like, it's not involved in that. It's kind of behind a wall. It's just dealing with the other part of the mining and which to me sounds smart, but am I understanding that right?
Yes. I mean, obviously, what Benedict has just explained very well is that there are elements in terms of peace and conflict resolution that have to take place in this area, which it wouldn't be advisable, professional, in any way for a commercial operation like Peace Gold to get involved with. These are very historically, they're often community-based conflicts. I think I've used the word methodology quite a few times. One of the approaches which CRC have I don't think it's unique to them, but I think they're extremely good, effective deliverers of this, is they bring effectively what would have been two conflicted communities together and get them working together. So I remember my very first trip there in 2013, illustratively, I turn up, I've never visited the Congo before. I fly in, I turn up for a 5-day workshop with a group of miners. And it actually turned out that 6 months previously, quite a few of them had been in opposing militia groups. So I'm thinking, this is quite an entertaining context for me, and that's a very good example of how CRC, they work very hard at de-escalating the conflict, getting everybody to stop the conflict, and then bringing them together and say, let's work together for our mutual benefit. And so the cooperatives that we piloted Peace Gold with were two, and they had representatives from what historically would have been two conflicting communities inside each cooperative, working together at management level, at digger level, et cetera, et cetera. So they're working for their own financial benefit and obviously community benefit. So all of a sudden, by working alongside each other, shoulder to shoulder, they realize that they're all human beings and they all have the same aspirations and they all ultimately want the same goals. So part of the methodology and part of the genius of the delivery on the ground is having people come together from historically different angles and respect the fact that we can have a differing opinion on something without it turning into a conflict. So yeah.
Brilliant.
One final technical question, just if you, and Estelle might know the answer to this. Do you know if the gold would or could qualify as LBMA good delivery?
So that's our aspiration over time, and the LBMA has a program to foster greater inclusion of responsible ASM gold, and we know them very well. The initial exports will, the compliance framework we're going to be using will cover Congolese law, and it will cover what's necessary for the regional certification mechanism of the ICGLR. It will cover the corporate due diligence requirements for the initial mineral off-taker. And it may not need to be LBMA certifiable or acceptable good delivery standards for the first trades. But we are planning to use their ASM toolkit within our compliance framework in order to have a view on the extent to which the gold will be ready to qualify or not, and what investments need to be made in order to make it qualifiable. So we need to get to this period of the first trade with the model as it is now, using that compliance framework to do that due diligence in order to know what the gaps are and what corrective actions would be necessary were we to find an LBMA refiner that was willing to offtake the material. But what I can say is we may not need it to be an LBMA refiner. This is a conflict affected and high risk area. LBMA refiners are ultimately run by the banks, right? And banking compliance is extraordinarily black and white and tight, and many banks are very clear that they simply will not do business with you if you're touching the DRC with. So, there have been refiners in the past. MKS PAMP, for example, were trying to do responsible sourcing of gold from an NGO called Impact that had something called the Just Gold Project. Matthew's here, and he was involved in that. But it was more like a CSR project than really a proper LBMA responsible sourcing project. And it just is, for many LBMA refiners, too challenging commercially to do something like this. So we're looking at it. We actually have offtake agreements with 3 different refiners, one of whom is LBMA, and they are open to handling the gold and processing it for us should we move to that. But that's not our first goal. That's something for the medium term because it's actually not immediately necessary in order to get the system moving. And we can still be classified as responsible, provided that we're conformant or compliant with the law, with the requirements of the off-taker, and most likely we'll use the RMI's framework for responsible sourcing of gold, because that's the lowest benchmark. And that's OECD Minerals Guidance compliant. And that will be the place to start, and then we'll gradually ramp up in performance over time.
Yeah. Thank you. Understood. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Christoph, I think you have a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for this enlightening talk. Greetings to Gregory. We met in Switzerland some months back on impact investing. I'm working also on fair trade issues, but not specifically in mining until now, but it's coming. But my question is, you spoke about the white elephant, but what is the black elephant in the room? That means those who lose something with fair mining, peace gold or whatever, they are losers, because you said, and also other speakers, Benedict and Estelle, the cooperatives are queuing. They are interested, of course. They want legalization, they want increase of benefits, but 95% of illicit, illegal trading, there are people who fear to lose. So how to deal with them, and it's a very criminal environment. I mean, I know more North and South Kivu than Ituri, but in North and South Kivu, I mean, it's about life and death of smuggling gold and or other minerals. So how do you deal with the security issue, and how do you deal with those who are on the loser side, who want to boycott what you do, or to whatever? And I open another remark. I'm working with the Chinese ministries, and they are interested. I mean, even the Ministry of Mining or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Economy, Foreign Trade, are interested to work on that. But even they say they have not a full control on all these criminals, for the illicit mining. Some may be under the same bed, and others want to overcome it. But so how to deal with this cloud of people? How to deal with it?
Chris, I'm so pleased you've asked this question, because it shows you really understand the reality of shifting systems, and any ASM sourcing, or even if we work with our industrial miners, helping them with their ASM management, and they seek to provide some form of support to ASM in order to build better relations there. There's always this reconfiguration of the political economy that happens as a result of your intervention. And so understanding vested interests, doing that kind of political economy analysis, and really planning for those risks and understanding those relationships is really important. We, in the context of DRC, we, alongside the Zafi project, we helped with the Medini project, where we did exactly that kind of political economy analysis. In Ituri, looking at where the finance was flowing in and out, where the relationships to corrupt politicians were, what the relationship to armed groups were, in order to get a feel for what that landscape was. That work is now out of date, but we have a methodology for doing that as Levin Sources, and it's something that we kind of do as standard as part of our situation analysis and risk assessments. Unfortunately, at the very start of this project, this work, our funding is so low that we have to go very gently and do small trades. But they're still valuable trades, but they're small relative to the overall production and gold economy of the region. Now, the good news with that is it means that the adverse impact on these economic or political actors will be quite small. And so that makes it, a bit more feasible to operate, I won't say entirely under the radar, but as less of a threat. But one of the things that we will do once we have adequate funding is we will run exactly that kind of vested interest analysis. And we'll work really closely with our cooperatives, because what we'll need to understand is who they're selling to, where the money's coming from for their existing production systems, who's behind that money, to what extent is that tied to money laundering, or is it tied to other forms of bad actor influence in relation to illegal timbering or human trafficking or drug or whatever it might be, or political electioneering or political profiteering, whatever. I'm sure there'll be a whole host of it. So that analysis will be done, but we can't get to that until we have the funding for it. And unfortunately, today, most funders aren't interested in investing in the institutionalization of Peace Gold. They think that they just have to give money and buy gold. They don't understand that they could put people's lives at risk if we don't approach this sensitively, intelligently, gently, and with a lot of knowledge and understanding about what those real risks are. So we are looking for financial partners that aren't just wanting to lubricate this, but are wanting us to build something like Keyvan said, that is stable and sustainable, because we are gathering the right information in the right ways to make the best decisions possible for our beneficiaries, for our institution, and for our investors.
Thank you.
I mean, Christoph, if I can just supplement what Estelle's brilliantly said, obviously we've had these discussions with the cooperatives, exactly these discussions. We've done some of this analysis. We've workshopped a lot of this out in the group meetings that we do. And I've asked exactly that question. Now, nobody is better positioned on the ground to understand what the financial dynamics are than the cooperatives themselves. And they understand the dynamics of conflict, low level, high level, illegality, criminality. They understand that, perhaps to a depth which you and I never will, because they have to live in it all the time. And for them, this goes back to my opening comments about this is one of the motivations as to why they want to move, because this illicit framework is like, it's like quicksand. It just keeps moving around, and they want stability, and this is what it is. I think around the control thing, there is a recognition on our part that we can't control everything, and we would be arrogant if we said we can. But what we can control, so we focus on what we can control, and we mitigate that which and we're aware of that which we can't control. So, in terms of banking, financial movements, no cash for gold on the ground, making sure that all of our processes in terms of processing gold, smelting gold, valuing gold, all of that is done traceably, transparently. Again, in all of the workshops that we did right back from the very beginning, we have always involved local government officials. So nobody in the provincial system in Ituri, everybody knows what we're doing. Now there's sensitivity in that, but we're not doing anything. So light actually is our best partner here.
Transparency, yeah.
Transparency is our finest ally in this. The governor knows what we're doing. The provincial division of Mine knows what we're doing. They are going to be involved with what they're doing. And actually, they're motivated. They want to do it right as well. They just don't have the resources to do it right. Everybody is under-resourced. Why? Because that region is asset stripped and commodity stripped on a systemic level. Nobody, as Estelle alluded to, we've been trying to do this fundraising round now to get this thing off the ground for the last 18 months. And all the institutional impact investors have all said, we're not going to do it. Their websites say they do it, but they don't actually do it because nobody wants to go first. They're happy to go second and third, but they want somebody to step in and take the risk. And actually, that's where we've now got to. Estelle and I had a conversation the other week. I'm slightly going off on a tangent here, but it's a good tangent. And we just said, sod it. We're going to do it ourselves. We know what we need to get the setup in play. We're going to do it ourselves. We launched a friend and family round, and we went through the number that we needed as a baseline minimum to build the basic infrastructure out in country within 3 days. And that round is still open, and we can talk about that towards the end of the call if people are interested. We're in conversations about putting a facility together to be able to buy the gold, because again, on the ground, one of the biggest drivers for informality is pre-financing.
Yeah.
all of these communities, all these cooperatives, they're gold rich, cash poor.
Yeah.
And so they're ripe for exploitation around pre-financing. And some of the financial models which have come in the last 6 to 9 months in the area are the most extreme in terms of exploitation that I've ever witnessed in my nearly 30 years of doing this. So we have a financial system in play that it's all goes through legitimate bank accounts. We don't do any cash for gold on the ground. And actually the miners are grateful for that. They're very grateful for the fact that we're insisting on financial transparency and product traceability. Those are the two lamps that we use to kind of guide us in terms of what we're doing. But very practically, we will not be able to control every single factor out there, and to say that we can is illusionary. But we can control what we can control.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Thank you very much.
So we're rounding out our time together. I don't want to lose Ananda's question. Ananda really wants to, I think if I paraphrase correctly, what are the pitfalls? How do we do this? How do we scale this elsewhere? The secret sauce. Have you written this up? Do you have this available for others who are interested in scaling?
Yes. Yeah, we do. I mean, obviously we've got our pitch deck, we've got our funding round that's out there at the moment. We're asking for people to, it's kind of tranches of £5,000 or dollars if that's your currency. And that's basically a loan over 18 months agreement. That our main drive is to get to £100,000. That obviously takes us well over the mark for building out the infrastructure in the country. And the other piece that we're looking for on the financial support is the trade facility. So we're looking for a $500,000 facility, and our commercials are such that we can support the payment, the fees that will be attached to a facility to purchase. We need that for 12 months to get us going. Once we're past 12 months, we're generating enough revenue to be able to fund the process ourselves in terms of buying. So it's a very strong commercial model. But like I said, part of the challenge that we've had is that, all the people that are out there, they hear the word Congo and they panic. Banks are the worst. We've had conversations with 15 banks. And as soon as they hear Congo, they run away because they're scared. They're cowards. They say they do it, but they don't actually do it.
And also gold traders. I mean, 11 Sources works with a range of commodities traders. And there's one in particular that is known for being comfortable with higher risk settings, is doing some really innovative and great work on responsible sourcing of ASM gold in West Africa and in East Africa. And I actually had a conversation with their lead on that, and he said, I simply can't take DRC to my MD because the banks will close us down. So there is a stigma, understandably, because of the history and perhaps because of Dodd-Frank Section 1502. And the easiest way to de-risk if you're a bank is to just say no and put somebody on a list. Whereas if you're conformant with the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, if you're conformant with United Nations guiding principles and their approach to supply chain due diligence, you don't de-risk by disengaging. You de-risk by engaging and bringing the risk level down for everyone. That's how you shift systems, and that's how you transition economies from being conflict affected to being increasingly stabilized through economic development. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to live that continuous improvement model, and we're trying to live that engagement model, so that we're kind of doing the opposite of what the convenient forms of due diligence would say, which is just let's bifurcate the world into the places we don't touch and the places we do touch. And we'll leave the places we don't touch to those that are just going to not care about people or not care about ethics and not care about, the depravity in which people may have to live because they've essentially become marginalized from the world economy or from the responsible side of the world economy. We don't want to see that happen. We want to respect what these miners have expressed as their unmet desire to participate and to be respected themselves and to be part of driving transition and transformation for their local communities. But we need institutions and partners that get that and get that we've got to do something a bit different here. And we certainly need to find financial partners that know how to play that huge conservatism and reticence in the financial system to engage with DRC, that can open up ways through which that is possible for us to do it responsibly so that we can really move this forward. I just want to say as well that, when we first began fundraising for this, we were fundraising for 3 million because we'd been told, by development finance institutions that we were far too small in what we were looking for, even though this is the kind of thing they'd support, but we needed to be 5-10 million for them to be interested. We were then told by other investors that we needed to be 2 to 3 million to make it worth their time. And at the end of the day, what we've said is, right, let's scale it right down to 100 grand and just get started with the bare bones. And actually, we can see what the pathway looks like to make this bigger and bigger. And we will get to that possibility for the 2 to 3 million investment that will really introduce the consolidation, the cleaner production systems, all the types of interventions that Benedict's talking about to really drive, social performance, etc. We can really start to deliver on that once we've had a few trades running. But the perfect is the enemy of the good here. We've got to be pragmatic, and that's why we've scaled the ask right down.
Brilliant.
And I add to that, Estelle. So many people in that country are honest, hardworking. They're good people. They're not corrupt. They're not criminal. They're not motivated by some of the more nefarious things that are happening on the ground by people that aren't even from within the Congo. They're honest people. They're good people. They're moral people. Yeah. And they want to be given the opportunity. And of course, the system itself, this is the great irony of it. The very system which is set up to remove conflict from mineral supply chains is actually the very toolkit which helps to perpetuate it, because it makes it an impossible bar for ordinary people to get over. Yeah. And there you have your neo-colonial mentality at the very heart of the economic process. And, we recognize that the psychology of this is perhaps, and the investment psychology around this is perhaps 50% of the problem. It's not militia groups on the ground. It's the investment community saying, we're not going to do it because it's too risky. Right. But if they did do it, you'd massively de-risk the whole area. That's your catch-22.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant, everyone. Definitely a rich conversation, one that we don't have every day in this type of context. I'm hearing stability. I'm hearing aligning objectives. I'm hearing a lot of humility, coming in as outsiders, working in a context that we may understand intellectually, but not experientially. I believe we've rounded out a question and response between Ananda and Chris. Ananda wanting to understand, how have you done this over this many years? How are you creating some level of stability and predictability in this kind of context? Well, Chris is offering to write up the case study. So amazing outcome from just one short call. To round this out, what I will do is, within a week, I will follow up with a thank you note to all the panelists and participants. We will share in there maybe a couple of resources. Greg, maybe you can provide the deck. We'll circulate that along with contact information. Along with that, part of this is you may have additional questions. I would like to connect you with the panelists, one or more. Should you have any questions or interested in funding anything that was discussed today? Really, this is a trivial amount of money that is in the way, but it unlocks their model their model for, a full capital model through commercial endeavors. So it's really an opportunity, low threshold. We're not in the pitch business. We're just, if it makes sense to you, you'd like to continue this conversation, please reach out to me or follow up on the contact information that is in the thank you note. I will share the recording, Gary, and please distribute that to anyone else who might be interested. Beyond that, I see Jared put in a late comment. I want to make sure we don't miss that.
Yeah, no worries. Just looking to maybe advance the conversation about Philippines.
Brilliant.
Happy to.
Brilliant. So a lot of great things are coming together just in this call. If we can bring more pieces together through introductions, please let me know. Beyond that, I wish you all lovely days and evenings, and we'll see you on the next session, hopefully. Thank you.
Keivan, thank you so much, everybody, for being such a great participants. Impact for Breakfast.
Thank you, everyone.
Bless us
Thank
all,
you so much, Keivan.
Onwards and upwards.
Real
Thank
pleasure.
you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
See you hopefully soon.
Thank you.